inflation came down. That was real. The numbers confirmed it, the headlines celebrated it. But you went to the grocery store and the bill was the same. You looked at your rent and the number hadn't moved. You checked your monthly expenses and nothing, not one thing, had actually gotten cheaper. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet frustration started building. Because you were told things were getting better and they didn't feel better, that frustration is not irrational. That frustration is the correct response to something nobody properly explained. Inflation coming down is not the same as prices coming down. Those are two completely different things. Inflation measures the rate at which prices rise. When it slows, it means prices are rising more slowly. It does not mean they fall. It does not mean the grocery bill returns to what it was. It means the climb decelerated. The prices themselves stayed exactly where they climbed to. They settled at a new level, and that new level is now simply what things cost. Not temporarily, permanently. That's the part nobody explained when the good news was being announced. And it's the reason life still doesn't feel cheaper, even though the numbers technically improved. The baseline shifted, and almost nothing in daily life has reflected that shift the way most people expected it would. That's what we're going to walk through, because it's showing up in more places than most people realize. Start with food because that's where most people feel it first and most consistently. The grocery bill was supposed to normalize. That was the expectation when inflation started cooling. Prices had spiked. Supply chains had been disrupted. Things would settle, but the settling didn't mean cheaper. It meant the higher price became the standard price. Eggs, meat, dairy, bread, cooking oil, the items that go into every cart every week without fail. All of them repriced during the inflation period. None of them repriced back down when inflation slowed. The shelf looks exactly the same as it did 3 years ago. The number on the tag does not, and it's not just groceries. Eating out tells the same story from a different angle. Restaurants absorbed higher food costs, higher labor costs, and higher operating costs during the inflation period. The only way to survive that was to raise menu prices. So they did, and when inflation slowed and some of those input costs eased slightly, the menu didn't get reprinted with lower numbers. The prices stayed. In some cases, the portions quietly got smaller, while the bill stayed the same or went higher. Then, there are the expenses that don't require a decision to encounter: utilities, insurance, phone and internet plans, subscription services that added a few dollars to the monthly charge without a formal announcement. None of these increases felt dramatic individually, but they're all pulling from the same paycheck every single month, and they're all sitting at a level they weren't at 3 years ago. That's the pattern. Not one thing that got expensive. Everything that got expensive at the same time and then stayed there when the headlines moved on. And there's a specific reason none of it came back down. To understand why prices didn't reverse, you have to understand the position businesses found themselves in when inflation slowed. During the inflation period, the costs feeding into almost every product and service went up simultaneously. Ingredients, packaging, shipping, labor, energy, commercial rent, all of it moved higher at the same time. So prices on shelves and menus moved higher to reflect that. That part most people followed. What most people expected was that when inflation cooled, those prices would follow back down. It's a reasonable assumption. It's just not how pricing works in practice. When inflation slowed, some input costs eased slightly. Shipping came down from its peak. Some commodity prices pulled back. But the structural costs didn't reverse. Labor didn't get cheaper. Commercial rent for businesses didn't decrease. Insurance for businesses went up and stayed up. So the business was left in a position where its costs were still elevated, just not climbing as fast as before. And the decision became simple. Lower the price and compress the margin back to where it was before, or hold the price and protect the margin the business had adjusted to surviving on. Most held the price. Not as a coordinated decision across industries, just individual business math repeated millions of times across millions of businesses simultaneously. And once a price settles at a new level, something predictable happens. Consumers adjust to it. The new number starts to feel normal. The old price becomes a memory, and there's no competitive pressure on any individual business to go back to the old number because every business around them is operating at the same new level. When an entire market reprices at the same time, there's no incentive to be the one that goes back down. The new level just becomes normal. And normal is where prices tend to stay. That dynamic playing out across groceries, restaurants, utilities, insurance, and everyday services simultaneously is what created the environment most people are living inside right now. A life that costs measurably more to maintain than it did 3 years ago, with no signal that it's going back. And that has a very specific effect on the household budget. This is where the shift stops being economic and starts being personal, because a permanent price reset doesn't show up as one dramatic moment in most people's lives. It shows up as a slow accumulation of smaller ones. It's the grocery run where something goes back on the shelf. Not because you can't technically afford it, but because the total is already higher than you wanted it to be, and you're making adjustments without fully deciding to. It's the restaurant you used to visit without a second thought that now requires a small internal conversation before you book. It's opening the banking app at the end of the month and noticing the number is lower than it should be. Not dramatically lower, just consistently and quietly lower than it used to be at the same point in the month. It's the savings that aren't building at the pace you planned. The purchase that has been sitting in a browser tab for 3 months. The feeling that you're working the same amount, maybe more, and somehow not getting any further ahead. That feeling is not a distortion. It's an accurate read of what's happening. The baseline shifted. The cost of maintaining the same life went up across every category. And for most households, income didn't move at the same pace. Wages grew during this period for some workers. But for a large portion of households, the wage growth didn't fully close the gap the price increases created. The math still didn't add up, so the adjustment happened quietly in behavior instead. Fewer meals out, smaller grocery hauls, delayed purchases, habits that changed without a formal decision to change them. Just a gradual compression across the month that adds up to a noticeably different daily life than the one that existed before. The part that makes it harder to process is that nothing looks catastrophically wrong from the outside. The economy is technically functioning, inflation has slowed, employment numbers look reasonable. But inside the household budget, the pressure is real and consistent. And it isn't easing because the prices aren't coming back down, which means the compression isn't a temporary phase to get through. It's the new shape of the month. And it isn't just hitting one area of spending. Here's what makes this period genuinely different from a normal stretch of financial pressure. It isn't one category that got expensive. It's every category that got expensive at the same time and then stayed there. Rent is still elevated. Groceries are still elevated. Utilities are still elevated. Insurance across almost every category is still elevated. And all of those elevated costs are pulling from the same paycheck simultaneously. That's the part that gets lost when any single category gets discussed on its own. A 5% rent increase sounds manageable in isolation. A grocery bill that's still 30% higher than it was 3 years ago sounds significant but survivable on its own. An insurance premium that went up sounds annoying but not catastrophic on its own. But none of these things exist on their own. They exist together, in the same budget, at the same time. And the combined weight of all of them sitting at elevated levels simultaneously is what creates the pressure that most people are carrying right now but struggling to articulate. Because no single line item broke the budget. The whole thing just got heavier, across every category, at once. And wages for most households moved, but not enough to offset all of it. Not enough to close the gap that the full picture created. That gap is real, and it explains something most people have been feeling but couldn't quite name. This is why things don't feel like they improved. Not because the economy collapsed, not because something dramatic went wrong, but because a quiet, permanent shift happened across every category of daily spending, and nobody announced it clearly when it was settling in. Inflation came down. That part was true. But coming down was never the same as going back. The prices that went up during the inflation period didn't reverse when the headlines changed. They stayed. They became the new normal, and the life that existed before that shift now costs more to maintain. Not slightly more in one area. More across every area at the same time. That's what a baseline reset actually feels like when you're living inside it. The indicators say things are stabilizing, just at a higher level than before. Stabilizing at a higher level is not the same as returning to where things were. It never was. The gap between what the economic numbers say and what the monthly budget actually reflects is real. It's not pessimism. It's not a misreading of the situation. It's the direct result of a system that repriced and didn't reverse. And once you understand that, the frustration starts to make complete sense. You weren't imagining it. You weren't managing money poorly. The cost of the life you already had simply went up. That's what this is. That's why it doesn't feel like it got better. And that's why so many people are quietly carrying a pressure they can't fully explain to anyone else. If this is something you've been feeling, and most people watching this have, leave a comment below. It helps more than you think to know you're not the only one noticing it.